Hi, everyone. I'm here in a hotel room for reasons that don't really matter, so I won't talk about them. So, I've been working on this video for a while. I love ranking directors' films, directors especially that I love, and Stanley Kubrick is one of my favorite all-time directors, so I thought, let's rank all his films. So I watched every single one of them. I rewatched the ones that I had to rewatch, and yeah, aside from the ones that I don't like, I've seen all of them at least twice. So, this rank is pretty much solid, and I don't think that I really need to explain myself. The title is already pretty self-explanatory, so let's just start the rank. People usually put Fear and Desire in this spot, but at least that film had some good shots and a couple of scenes that I actually remember. I saw this film only a week ago and I barely remember anything. I remember the boxing scenes and Jamie Smith's decent performance, but aside from that, absolutely nothing. So that's it. Let's move on. There's a reason people think this is Kubrick's worst film. Even Kubrick himself looked back on this film with contempt. That doesn't mean there aren't decent aspects to this film. There are well-placed shots, and I'm glad that the film doesn't paint the characters in a specific way, leaving just enough of a gray area to be interesting for maybe 10 minutes. Then the mediocre performances and really dumb story take me out of the rest of it. Thank God this film is only an hour long, or else I would feel much more contempt for this film than I already do now. This was a film that I just didn't connect to, plain and simple. I know it has its lovers, but I'm not one of them. There is stuff to appreciate like the cinematography and the performances. The film also had some well-implemented humor here and there, but aside from that, this almost did nothing for me. What really disconnected me from the film was the portrayal of the main character. He's a pedophile, to put it bluntly. But for some reason, the film tries to make you feel sorry for him in some scenes. The performance by James Mason was great, but that wasn't enough to make me care for him. It was also way too long at 2.5 hours when it really needed only to be an hour and a half or something. There are elements that show Kubrick was evolving, but the fact that he made this after The Killing and The Fantastic Paths of Glory, which are both way better, it just felt like a step back. Thank God Dr. Strangelove came after this. I know it has its lovers, and I'm glad those people love it, but I'm just not one of them. This was the only film where Kubrick didn't have complete control and was more of a director for hire, and it clearly shows. There are scenes where his personality can be seen, like the battle scene, the rolling fire scene, and there's some admittedly great cinematography, but aside from that, I see this as more of a mainstream film. Alex North's fantastic score does bring a ton of personality to individual scenes, and that definitely helped my enjoyment. It also has great costumes and production design. What dragged this film down for me was the story and pacing. It just felt like any other historical epic, and while I usually enjoy historical epics, there are just better ones out there. This isn't much of a Kubrick movie, so my Kubrick itch wasn't scratched. It just felt like this film did all that it needed in order to be a decent historical epic, but never anything more. I still think this is a pretty good movie, and I can see myself watching it again in the future, but when you compare it to the rest of Kubrick's filmography, it pales in comparison. Alright, now we're getting into awesome territory. This is probably the most complicated Kubrick film. Talking about this film could seriously take up the runtime of this video. The way that this film analyzes commitment is seldom found in any other movie, but it doesn't just address it, it really breaks it down. What does it mean to dedicate yourself to another human being? What kind of an effect does marriage have on the individual? Is jealousy inevitable? Is there a certain amount of jealousy permissible? Is a certain amount of jealousy needed to keep a marriage healthy? Is the destructive truth better than the comforting lie? These questions and more are put to the test here, and it's all great. Mainly because we know that many couples ask themselves these questions. The film feels much like a dream that turns into a nightmare that we can't escape, that we're forced to expose ourselves to until it's over, making the human race look and feel like sex-hungry monsters, willing to kill others to protect their darkest secrets. The way that this film approaches society's view on sex is also rare to see in film. It's uncompromising, blunt, and brutal, much like Kubrick as a director. The dynamic between Cruise and Kidman is absolutely fantastic. Probably the best character dynamic of all the Kubrick films. The piano music in the second half creates tension so beautifully. Not to mention the amazing use of Jazz Suite No. 2 by Dmitri Shostakovich, which happens to be one of my favorite orchestral pieces. And yes, that is the song that you hear in the background. The final conversation between Cruise and Pollock is the highlight, basically giving you all the answers yet leaving you just as, if not more, confused. What keeps this from being higher up in the ranking is its use of Kidman, or lack thereof. The dynamic she had with Cruise was fantastic, but she's not in the film nearly enough. She doesn't experience anything similar to what Cruise does, and that's very unfortunate. It's not clear if she even learns anything by the end of the film, though I have to admit the final line she delivers is perfect. Eyes Wide Shut may not be my favorite Kubrick, but it will always hold a special place in my heart. When I first saw this film a couple years ago, I wasn't into it. I certainly enjoyed it, but it didn't do much for me. It never left my head though, so when I rewatched it, I realized just how great this movie is. This is probably Kubrick's most accessible and most straightforward film, but it's also probably the sharpest. The dialogue is sleek, it's incredibly well written, and the performances show off just how sharp the dialogue is. The characters are great, and Sterling Hayden as Johnny Clay is beautiful, and probably my favorite performance from him. And yes, I am definitely counting General Ripper, who we'll talk about in a bit. Clay is such a cool character that it makes you wonder why aren't most heist movie characters this cool? It's incredibly intense, and every second out of the heist is just fantastic. It's such a perfectly paced film that even though it's told out of order, every scene feels as if it flows smoothly into the next. It's just plain awesome, and if you haven't seen it, then what are you doing? Even if you're not a Kubrick fan, I highly recommend you give it a watch because it's free on YouTube. There's literally not a single reason for you not to watch this, especially if you're a Kubrick fan. So please, watch this. Okay, I just pissed a lot of people off. I think this movie is great. Absolutely fantastic. I never thought for a second that this was an underperforming movie. I just happen to like the currently unmentioned Kubrick films more. I will agree in saying that Jack Nicholson delivers his best performance, and Danny Lloyd as, well, Danny was amazing as well. Shelley Duvall tends to get crap for her performance. Hell, she was even nominated for a Razzie, which is basically the Oscars for shitty movies. But I don't believe it was deserved at all. There are lines here and there in the beginning that could have been delivered much better, but damn, when she had to look scared, she pulled it off perfectly. The final hour of this film is just about as perfect as horror can get, constantly forcing you to question what's real and what isn't, essentially driving you into the state of insanity that Jack Torrance is in. I also love that this film was notoriously hated by Stephen King, who wrote the original book. It also has one of the best intros to a Kubrick film that I've seen. The foreboding music with amazing shots of the music, mountains, forests, and later the hotel itself set the tone incredibly well. It's cryptic, it's disturbing, it's Kubrick. I mean, what else can I say? It's one of the best psychological horror films ever made. It's The Shining. To think that Kubrick was barely out of his 20s when he made one of the best anti-war films ever made is very telling of how lesser veteran directors try and fail to create great anti-war films. This is such an honest portrayal of what war does to a human being. There are very few films that perfectly demonstrate the havoc that war can wreak on the mind. It never lets up, and it constantly bombards you with the cold, hard truth and cares little for your pathetic comfort. The struggles these characters go through and the consequences they face spark a wildfire of rage in me, especially when you consider that stuff like this actually happened in World War I. The performances are all amazing, with Kirk Douglas giving it his all as Colonel Dax, and George McCready plays one of the most hateable characters in cinema as General Moreau. The fantastic production design never gets old to look at, and the scenes in No Man's Land are perfect. The way this film confronts the difference between cowardice and intelligence and how often people mix up the two is never seen in cinema today. The screenplay really helps bring home this feeling of rage that boils inside of a person when people simply don't put themselves in another person's shoes. It's such a grim film, and it uncompromisingly delivers a story so well that by the end of it, it just makes you want to express that rage that's been building up inside of you. Just one of the many reasons why this is one of the best anti-war films ever made. A film that many people put at the #1 spot, A Clockwork Orange is probably the most unforgettable of the Kubrick films, and that's saying a lot. What makes A Clockwork Orange unforgettable, however, are two main things. One is the production design. The colors leap off the screen in beautiful fashion, something that isn't uncommon with Kubrick films, but in A Clockwork Orange, the beautiful colors are hiding a disgusting, brutal, nightmarish, and vengeful world with no laws where anything goes. The look of this near-future Britain setting will be burned into my mind forever. The opening scene alone is a fantastic example of production design that is simply unforgettable. And 2 is Alex, one of the most despicable, psychotic, and sadistic characters in cinema. Malcolm McDowell went all the way with his performance, and in every scene, he's clearly giving his all. The way that he enjoys terrorizing innocent people is something that has freaked me out ever since I saw this film for the first time. He simply loves spreading chaos and anarchy. He sees an art to sadism, like a method to the madness. And if him singing the song Singin' in the Rain while raping a woman isn't enough to convince you, then you're in denial. A Clockwork Orange is just amazing, plain and simple. I never actually saw this movie until a couple of weeks ago, and for that, I am very mad at myself. Now that I have seen it, I can't help but think that this is one of the most outrageous comedies I've seen in a long while. I love films that use very serious situations like nuclear war and turn it into something downright hilarious. Irony is critical in comedy. When you take it away, there's few avenues left to make people laugh. This film is so clever in how it uses situational humor and character humor that it's hard to pick out one scene specifically. Sterling Hayden as General Ripper is probably the greatest example of a satirical approach to such a war-hungry character. He's always speaking in weird phrases that make sense on paper, but when you actually start to look into it, it sounds absolutely insane. George C. Scott playing this over-the-top character was also a huge surprise, given that he always plays serious characters in other films. His accent, his mannerisms, his spastic delivery, it's all hilarious. And lastly, we have Peter Sellers, who plays not one, not two, but 3 different characters. I didn't actually notice until halfway into my first watch, so that should tell you how well he integrates separate personalities into these characters. But this film isn't just a ridiculous satire, it's also intelligent commentary. In fact, this film was so influential that laws were placed in the American government to prevent this exact scenario from happening. It's incredibly well shot, and the variety of locations make this film almost instantly recognizable. It's bombastic, yet smart. Funny, yet serious, and above all else, it's entertaining. I wouldn't miss out on this if I were you.
Kiss me goodbye and right.
There are 2 different people who like this film. People who like the first half and think the second half is not as good, and people who like the whole thing. I'm part of the latter group, because I will always defend this as one of Kubrick's absolute best. While I don't believe it's the best character study, I do believe that Joker is one of the best characters ever in a Kubrick film, constantly threading the needle between a jokester with heart and a killing machine with no remorse. Confronting the themes of the duality of man and what you lose to become the perfect killing machine, not to mention the pitch-perfect R. Lee Ermey performance. I love how Kubrick presents this character, showing an over-the-top, almost comical exterior while planting something truly sinister deep into your head, making sure that while you may laugh during some scenes, you know that there is something much darker beneath the surface. And when we see that darkness break free, it's absolutely masterful. The way that this film presents what manipulation does to the average person mentally is just perfect. The use of the dark and foreboding score also helps with this constant feeling that something truly dark is festering in the one place where you can't see it but only feel it, your mind. This film scarred me in ways that I can't explain. It made me look at manipulation in a whole new light, a light where these humorous moments shine a huge light on the parasite that is the perfect killing machine. And seeing Vincent D'Onofrio play the poster child of mental and physical abuse in Private Pile is just fantastic. Its subtlety is also incredibly scary, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I love this film so much. I mean, what the hell is there left to say about this masterpiece? It's constantly parodied, still talked about, and it's the film that people point to when they claim that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing. I mean, come on, give me some wiggle room. 2001 is a film that's meant to be experienced, not to be entertained by, but felt. You feel this movie, and every frame has something to appreciate within it. Whether that be the acting, set design, score, costume design, cinematography, or effects, there's always something to love on screen at any given moment. It's a perfect allegory of human curiosity and the evolution of man. What harm can too much curiosity cause? Are we obviously too blind to see that our own ambition may be the end of us? I also love how this film isn't concrete, not in the slightest. It's legitimately one of the most, if not the most, mysterious film ever made. What does the monolith stand for? Who put it there? What kind of effect does it have on us? Well, none of these questions are answered, and the ambiguity surrounding the monolith is just friggin' perfect. I have never seen this film on the big screen, but out of all the films that I've seen in my life that I have, I wish this were among them. The imagery is wholly hypnotic, and the striking use of color is rarely seen in any other film. Kubrick made sure that 0 people that weren't involved on set were able to see what was happening. He even burned the sets he used after filming was finished. There's no way we could ever know how this film was created, and quite honestly, I don't want to know. If someone involved behind the scenes said that Kubrick was simply a wizard who made 2001 work through literal magic, then I wouldn't be surprised. It's something that could only ever exist because of the art of filmmaking. And that's pretty much all I got to say about 2001. Despite being 3 hours long and a period piece, this film is one of the most entertaining films I have ever seen. Half a year ago, I came home from work at 11:30 at night because I worked a late shift, put this film on only expecting to get halfway, and watched the whole thing in one sitting. It's such a gorgeous film with some of the greatest cinematography and use of the camera I have ever seen. The purposeful zooms, pans, tracking shots, and stills to this day leave my jaw on the floor. The landscapes are breathtaking, the interiors are beautiful, and the use of candlelight is striking. This film is just plain stunning. The costumes are incredibly professional and look very lived in. They fit with the time period and only immerse me more into the story. There's so much detail in each individual shot that it's legitimately exhausting trying to take it all in. There are so many period pieces out there that look so fake, sloppy, and unprofessional, but like all of his greatest works, it's clear Kubrick wanted everything to work so well that it looks as if this film came from the 18th century. This is a huge film covering many years in a man's life, and by the end, you feel all those years, even though you've only been watching for a few hours. The music, too, is amazing. The variety of instruments used makes a lover of well-orchestrated music like me gush over the use of music in this film. The use of themes in this film is also masterful. It's a story of coincidence, and it's also the story of a boy searching for a father figure. The use of the classic duel is also fantastic. There are quite a few scenes where the story could come to an end at one wrong move, yet it just so happens that Barry's survival is the outcome. Ryan O'Neal did an amazing job as Barry, and every performance, come to think of it, is fantastic. Every character that shows up is memorable, and a lot of characters show up. There are a few characters that show up for only 5 minutes, but have such a memorable impact that they're impossible to forget. Whether you love or hate this movie, impossible to forget is exactly what it is. In a world of overblown action epics that use basic formula and barely go outside the box, Kubrick did nothing but go outside the box. He pushed the boundaries, he explored the unknown, and with all his films, especially Barry Lyndon, he told stories that could never be copied. We will never see another Kubrick again. Nobody pushes boundaries like he did. I've seen Barry Lyndon 5 times, and even though I only rewatched it a week ago, I'm very excited for his 6th viewing. It's beautiful, it's adventurous, it's colorful, and it's even somewhat poetic. But above all else, Barry Lyndon is Kubrick, and remains to be my favorite Kubrick film, and my personal 3rd favorite film of all time. That was a very exhausting video to make. I've been pretty much working on it almost non-stop for the past, well, writing-wise, for the past 3 days, and I've also been rehearsing just to make sure that I don't need to constantly edit. I want to trim down the editing as much as possible just so that I can get this video out soon. Well, obviously you're watching it, so it's already up, but yeah, I don't really have much of an outro. I don't really have any plans in terms of big projects yet. I'm still on the trip. I'm gonna wait until I get back and I'm settled in back home. I already have a quarantine video written and pretty much done. So when I get back and settled, I'll do the finishing touches to that video and release it so that it's not like a 3-week span without any videos. Don't worry, there's another one coming soon. And then I'll figure out what to do then. But yeah, that's gonna be it. It's not actually that late. But, that's it. Thank you very much for tuning in, and if you made it to the end, thank you. And if you haven't seen any of these movies, I implore you, check at least 2 of them out, because they're all great. Minus, of course, the ones in the beginning that I said weren't very great. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Cynic, the Critic. I don't like referring to myself by my channel name. Never mind. I'm going offline. For now.